Hey friends, before we get started, whether you're new here or you're a regular, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss a thing. We're on our journey to 25,000, and with your help, we'll get there in no time. Thanks for all that you do. Now, on with the show. Hello everyone, and welcome to The Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Summer is here, and the sky is about to light up. But behind every crackle of fireworks, every cheer from the crowd, something darker waits. Tonight, we're celebrating America's birthday the only way we know how. By sharing more than 10 unsettling tales of haunted holidays, unexplained disappearances, and the strange figures that come out when the sky burns red, white, and blue. Because out there, beyond the barbecue smoke and backyard laughter, it appears something is always watching. So, let's get started, shall we? Many of us encounter someone who just grabs our attention in a way that we can't explain, like they know you from this life or a previous one. I come from a long line of people who encountered ghosts, but I don't encounter the supernatural that much. I have in the past, but not often. Tonight, I know I did. This isn't fake or made up. Our town is near a beach. Every 4th of July, we go to see the fireworks over the water. This year was no exception. Me and my wife arrived to set up chairs, settled in the sand, chilled out waiting for darkness to fall and the fireworks to start. A slight breeze, a perfect, beautiful evening. About 20 minutes after we settled, I smelled a waft of what I can only describe as decayed roses on the breeze. Like flowers in a vase that should have been thrown out a few days ago. It wasn't a bad smell, but just like sweet roses that weren't fresh. And then I saw her. From behind walked a young woman in jean shorts, a t-shirt, and a ball cap. She looked about 25, had light brown, wavy hair, came down about halfway to her back. I was immediately struck by her presence. Not because she was beautiful. I mean, she wasn't ugly. She was pretty. But she looked a bit off. Her face especially. It looked pretty, but weird. Her features didn't line up right or something. Wavy, almost. She stopped about 15 feet ahead of us and turned around. She looked right at me and smiled, and then sat down in the sand. Again, she still looked off. Something was amiss. But I was enchanted by this young woman. I looked at my wife to see what she thought, but zero reaction, like she didn't even see her. I smelled the decayed roses on the wind again. This young woman in jean shorts and a ball cap sat down, took off her flip-flops, and looked to the sky. She was sitting perpendicular to us, but facing away. When I thought about it more, 2 things struck me as very odd. She had no electronics, no cell phone. Everyone on the beach was taking selfies, playing with their phones, even the elderly. This young woman had no phone visible, nothing with her. Also, her clothes looked straight out of the 70s. I grew up in the 70s, so I know what normal people looked like back then. And she had that 70s look, totally down to the tomboy jeans, and really just everything about her. She seemed very content just sitting there looking at the sky, not worried about cell phones or beach chairs or anything. Again, I smelled the sweet decayed roses in the wind. My wife had her phone out, taking a picture of the scene, the sunset. The sky was really pretty. Shortly after, the woman got up and walked away behind us. I turned around to see where she went, but she truly disappeared. She was gone. Something told me to look at the picture. I grabbed my wife's phone, looked at the photo, and I wasn't even really surprised to see that she didn't appear in it. You might think that I would have freaked out, but at some spiritual level, I really didn't expect her image to show up. Just a green orb appeared where she would have been sitting in the sand. I included the picture here. I'm calm about it because I could tell that she meant no harm. I really believe that she was a person who passed away back in the 70s, and she was just checking in on me for some reason. Maybe a family member. Something made me feel like I knew her. I'm racking my brain to try and remember if I knew a young woman who passed away back when I was a child. I just can't put it together right now, but if I do, I'll update. I grew up on the edge of a dying town in Iowa. Our house backed up to endless cornfields that changed hands every few years. Sometimes they were planted, sometimes left dry and brittle for seasons at a time. Either way, they were always a little creepy. This happened when I was about 13. It was the 4th of July, and my cousins were in town from Des Moines. The adults were drinking on the porch, and we were left to entertain ourselves. Someone came up with the brilliant idea to sneak into the cornfield behind our house and light off a few fireworks. Nothing crazy, just bottle rockets and sparklers that we'd grabbed from a cardboard stand off the highway. It was a clear night, humid and hot, with a stillness that makes every little sound seem louder than it should be. We lit a couple of the rockets and watched them arc through the air over the rows of corn. The sparks crackled, faded, and we were left in the dark again. I was about to light off another when my cousin Jeremy grabbed my arm. "Did you see that?" he whispered. I hadn't, but the other two nodded. At first I thought they were just messing with me, but then I saw it too. Lights, small, faint, between the rows of corn, like flickering lanterns, moving slowly. Not swaying like flashlights would, hovering. I thought maybe it was neighbors or someone on the other side of the field, but the longer we watched, the less sense it made. There was no sound like footsteps of someone carrying these lights. They didn't seem to follow any sort of path. They weaved between the rows like they were floating. And then Jeremy shouted. One of the lights was moving towards him fast. He dropped his sparkler and ran. We all followed, tearing through the rows until we hit my backyard. The porch lights never looked so good. My dad saw us running and yelled something, but we ignored him and bolted inside, locking the door behind us. Later, I tried to explain. I told him about the lights, how they moved, how they didn't seem normal. He just looked tired, told me it was some sort of gas, local kids with headlamps. "Don't go into the fields at night," he said. And that was that. But I asked my grandma about it the next day, half expecting her to scold me, but still curious. Instead, she got real quiet. She said, "They do show up every few years. I see them. Just let them be." That was it. We didn't go back into the field. Not that summer and never. But every year since then, when the 4th of July shows up, I can't stop thinking about it. This story isn't mine exactly, it's my dad's, but he only ever told it to me once, and he made me promise that I wouldn't repeat it unless I truly believed him. So, Dad, if you're listening somewhere, I believe you now. This happened in the early 1980s. Back then, my dad worked for the local utilities company in Oregon. Small town, mostly remote accounts, lots of back and forth across mountain roads. One of his summer routes was delivering gas and basic supplies to the cabins around Patriot Lake. Most of them were seasonal, rented by families in the summer for fishing and camping. It was a nice place where people left their cabins unlocked and their extra key in a coffee can under the porch. Patriot Lake wasn't fancy, but it was known for being peaceful, isolated, quiet. There was one cabin, though. It was different. It was listed on his supply sheet like the others, but something about it always felt off. It was at the farthest point on his route, tucked down a rutted road, one that barely passed for a driveway. He said even on the hottest day, the trees around it made the air feel cold. Not shady, cold. The weird thing was the cabin was marked as currently leased every year. He was supposed to drop off propane tanks and refill water drums, but every time he got there it looked abandoned. The windows were covered in thick dust, cobwebs on the porch swing, rusted lock on the door, no tire tracks. No sign of anyone having driven in or out, but the order always came in like clockwork. The first few years, he did his job, dropped the supplies, checked the boxes, and moved on. One summer, though, he thinks it was 83, something changed. He pulled up and noticed that the front door was open, just slightly, enough to see that the inside was dark. He called out, thinking maybe someone finally was staying there. No answer. He stepped into the porch and got this overwhelming feeling, like something inside the house knew he was there. Not in a paranoid way, just aware. He knocked. Nothing. And then he reached out to leave the propane tank just inside the door. And that's when he saw the table. It was set. Plates, silverware, cups, like someone had just stepped away. But everything was covered in dust, even the chairs. They had thick cobwebs stretching between them and the floor. No footprints, no recent movement, just a frozen dinner table in the middle of a cabin that shouldn't have been in use. He backed out slowly and shut the door. He said it felt like if he touched it again, something would shut it for him. He didn't report it, didn't mark it on the sheet. But when he got back to the office, the dispatcher said something strange. "Hey, next time you're up at Patriot, don't skip the old cabin. The renter called in and said their delivery never arrived. They need you to come back." Dad never went back. He switched routes that summer. Dad said, as he drove away from the cabin that day, he felt someone sitting next to him in his passenger seat. A feeling, an entity that stayed with him until he got back onto the main road. He told me he never felt anything like it before or since, and he thinks what he experienced was a spirit, and what happened to them when they were living. He's not sure, but he didn't think it was good. I grew up in a neighborhood where every 4th of July meant chaos in the best and worst ways. There was no official fireworks, just whatever people could get their hands on from across the state line. By 6 p.m., our street would fill with smoke, kids running barefoot, adults yelling half-hearted warnings like, "Careful with that," while lighting Roman candles in each other's directions. It was fun until it wasn't. There was a story all of the older kids told. Every year around the bonfire or during an awkward lull after sparklers ran out, someone would bring it up. Bottle Rocket Boy. The way I heard it was he was a kid from a few blocks over who blew himself up by taping too many fireworks together and trying to launch them from a glass bottle. Some versions said that it took off while he was looking down the barrel. Others said that the bottle exploded in his hands. They never found all the pieces. The older kids said that he still showed up sometimes. Burned clothes, no eyes, holding a bottleneck in one hand. You'd see him watching fireworks from the edge of the yard. If you looked too long, he'd look back. I never believed any of it. It was a scare tactic, a way to keep the younger kids from being stupid with explosives. But then the year that I turned 15, something happened. It was just me and 3 friends that summer. Jared, Lucas, Simone. We were bored, too old for sparklers, too broke for the real stuff. So we stole some leftover bottle rockets from Lucas's older brother, and we lit them up in the alley behind my house. We taped 3 of them together like idiots, stuck them in a broken beer bottle, and pointed it toward the sky. Jared lit the fuse, and we all scrambled back. The rockets launched, kind of. One went up and the other spun wildly. One hit a tree. Another slammed into a fence. Total mess, but we laughed like it was the best thing ever. But then Lucas stopped laughing. "Who's that?" he said. Across the alley near the edge of the brush, someone was standing. They weren't moving, they were just outside of the reach of the streetlight. We thought maybe it was a neighbor at first until they stepped forward into view. His face, blistered. His clothes all fucked up, melted in places. He looked like a burned-up crash dummy, dressed like a kid from the 90s. One hand hung useless at his side. The other, shattered brown bottle. Just the neck. He looked straight at us. Simone whispered, "Fucking Bottle Rocket Boy," half joking, like she didn't believe with her own eyes what we were seeing. And then the kid smiled, or at least looked like he did. With that, he turned around and disappeared into the dark. We ran inside, left everything behind. Before going in, Jared threw up in my front yard. The next day we went back because of course we did. The bottle that we used was shattered. Nothing weird about it, but near the fence where we'd seen the kid, there was another bottle. Old brown glass, almost melted at the base, like it had been pulled from a fire. None of us were touching it. We didn't really light fireworks off after that, at least not in our neighborhood. None of us really talked about that either. Last summer, though, when I saw Simone at a bar while we were visiting home, we caught up, had a drink. When I stood up to leave, she leaned in and said, "Whenever you hear fireworks, you think about that kid?" I shook my head. For sure. Last 4th of July, I was riding tailboard on the fire engine. It was a crazy day that pretty much started when we got there. Around 10 p.m., a call comes in for a traumatic injury. Dispatch does its thing, says 32-year-old male, injured by firework. They never give enough info anyway, but gold star for trying. I was super busy, chasing fire calls when we heard the medic 1. This is the unit that was dispatched to this call. They radioed for dispatch to dispatch a fire engine, emergency traffic, and to get a bird launched, with our LZ being the nearest middle school's parking lot. So we hop in the engine and take off toward this middle school to meet Medic 1 there. Medic 1 gets there first, being closer, and we pull up not too far behind. I jump out of the engine, hightail it across the parking lot, and hop into this ambulance. I look down to see this dude's military ID sitting on the countertop. He's active duty Army, as there's a base just a few minutes down the road. There's blood everywhere, all over the floor, all over the stretcher. The medic in the captain's chair is pretty seasoned. I glance down to see the patient, 32-year-old male, wearing a white t-shirt, khaki cargo shorts. The entire right side of this dude's face is missing. Half his lips gone, his nose gone, his right ear gone, his right eyeball also gone. He was still awake, trying to talk to us. He was kind of dazed, but you could see it in what was left of his face that he knew what was happening. Airways completely compromised, missing teeth. The medic had already suctioned, so we RSI this guy, put him under. The bird gets there. We transfer him into the bird along with a report and patient care, and he gets airlifted to the closest level 1 trauma hospital. The call was brought up at the next run review. The dude actually survived the ordeal, albeit with half of his face. He purchased a mortar firework from a local stand, which turned out to be a dud. It's the type that you set on the ground, light, and then run away as a timer runs down. Well, this one didn't work right. When he bent over to light it, the entire firework exploded in his face. His injuries were soft tissue trauma and multiple avulsions and lacerations. Several skull fractures, opened and closed, 2 subdural hematomas, and a concussion. Wild. Be safe out there, or you could literally lose your face, or worse, your life. When people talk about the scariest day of their life, it's usually something dramatic. A near-death experience, a break-in, a car crash. For me, it was the 4th of July, 1998. I was 11 years old, and the thing is, it started off like one of the best days of my childhood. My family had just moved to a new neighborhood outside of Bakersfield, real middle-of-nowhere kind of suburb. Nothing but dry heat, brown lawns, and cul-de-sacs full of kids with too much sugar and too little supervision. On the 4th, the neighborhood would basically shut down. Everyone set up folding chairs in their driveways. All the dads got drunk and competitive about who had the best fireworks. I remember the smell of lighter fluid, burgers, sunscreen, and those weird smoke bombs that fizz out without doing anything impressive. That year, I made a new friend named Blake. He lived 3 houses down, and we clicked immediately. Both into the same weird cartoons, both with slightly older sisters who ignored us. Around sunset, he and I would sneak away from the party and go explore the field behind the neighborhood. It was just an overgrown lot with rusted-out fence, some old irrigation pipes, nothing really there. But it kind of felt like a secret world when you were a kid. We were sitting on a busted cooler, watching the fireworks explode through the clouds, when I noticed someone standing near the fence, just standing there, watching us. I thought maybe it was someone's dad at first, or a teenager sneaking a smoke. But this person was really tall, like really tall. They had really long arms, and they didn't move. Even when a huge firework exploded right overhead, I whispered to Blake and pointed. He looked and froze. We both stood up at the same time. The figure didn't flinch, but then, slowly, he started walking along the tree line, following the edge of the lot, not towards us, just around us, like circling, but never getting too close. We took off running. When we got back to the street, everyone looked normal. Music playing, people laughing. The guy across the street lit up a full rack of mortars, and everyone cheered. But I couldn't shake it. I kept looking back toward the field. I didn't see the figure again that night. But later, way later, after the fireworks had died down and the neighborhood was going quiet, I woke up to the sound of crunching gravel. I peeked out my bedroom window. There was someone walking down our street. Not hurried, just slow. I couldn't see their face, but the way they moved, it felt the same. And those long arms, same floaty stride. Stopping right in front of my house. It looked up, right at me. I dropped to the floor so fast I bruised my own knee. Stayed there for what felt like an hour. I was too scared to breathe, basically. I never heard footsteps leave. Never heard a car, nothing. I thought, had I ever heard anything at all when it came to this thing? In the morning, I convinced myself that it was just nerves, probably a dream, until I saw the mailbox. It had been opened and pulled forward, snapped off its hinge and left hanging at this unnatural angle, like someone had tried to climb it to get a better look into my window. My dad thought that it was some idiot with a bat. He hammered it back into place, and that was that. But I knew. I never saw that tall man again. Not directly. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel like he was everywhere that summer. There's this spot just outside of the town I grew up in called Baker's Hollow. Nothing special, just a field, some woods, and half-burnt fire ring that people have used forever. My older sister used to say that kids back in her day called it Bonfire Hill. They joked that if you lit a fire on the 4th of July, you had to make a deal to leave. Like you couldn't just walk away. You had to say your name 3 times or the fire would keep you. It was total nonsense stuff. Everyone says that kind of crap when you're a kid around here. You just don't take it seriously. So anyway, this was roughly 9 years ago. I had just graduated and a group of us had decided to do something low-key for the 4th. We skipped the fireworks show and took a bunch of cheap beer and snacks out to Baker's Hollow. It was me, my friend Sean, 2 girls we were kind of seeing at the time, and Sean's cousin Eli. The vibe was super chill at first. We had music going, built a pretty solid fire, and we were just kind of enjoying the night. It wasn't until the music cut out that everything got weird. Sean checked his phone, but he had full battery. So did I. Then Eli looked up and said, "Why'd the fire get quiet?" And that's when I noticed it too. There was no sound anywhere. No crackling from the fire, no bugs, nothing. It wasn't just the music that cut out, it was literally everything. The air itself didn't feel right, too stuffy for being outside. And then the fire was pulsating. Not like a flare-up, more like it exhaled. I know that makes no sense, but it looked like it breathed out this quick burst of light and then dimmed down so low we could barely see each other. I figured that someone had tossed something weird in the flames, but everyone swore they hadn't touched it. And then Eli. "We're not supposed to leave yet." We all laughed, thinking he was just messing with us, but he wasn't smiling. His face was completely blank. He looked over at me. "You have to say it. All of you. Or we stay." I asked what he meant, but he just repeated it. "You have to say it. Or we stay." I looked at Sean, and he was starting to freak out too. And then his girlfriend just bolted, grabbed her bag, ran into the dark, broke whatever spell was going on, though. The fire suddenly sparked back to life. The sound of crickets and leaves came rushing back in like someone turned the volume back up. Music, everything. We, on the other hand, packed up in total silence and just ran after Sean's girl. She was waiting at the edge of the trail, completely pale and shaking. This was not a girl who was pretending. She said she saw someone else. Someone crouching on the opposite side of the fire, behind Eli. watching us. None of us were standing there. This happened about 5 summers ago. I just bought my first real camera. Nothing fancy, just something better than my cracked iPhone lens. I wanted to try it out during our town's 4th of July fireworks display, so I set up early at the hill overlooking the park. It's where everyone goes to get the best view. The fireworks started just after 9. I was standing off to the side of the crowd, adjusting my tripod and snapping long exposures. You know, trying to get that cool spiral of color look. I didn't even really look at the shots as I took them, just click, adjust, click, repeat. It wasn't until I got home that I saw it. In one of the frames, just one, there's something falling. A dark shape, blurry from motion, human-shaped. Legs bent slightly, arms out, falling through the sky, right next to a burst of gold and blue. It looked like a body. I stared at it for a long time, thinking maybe it was a weird trick of the light, a firework shell or debris caught in the shot. But when I zoomed in, it didn't look like metal or cardboard. It looked like skin, like a person falling from the sky, head first. I kinda thought about it all night, and the next morning I brought it up to my roommate. She thought I was being dramatic until she looked at it. And then she just said, "Okay, that's seriously creepy." We joked for a bit about aliens or skydiving gone wrong, but we were both kinda uneasy. 2 days later, someone found a body. Not at the park, not even near the hill. They found him in a wooded area on the edge of town, curled up in a dry creek bed. No ID, no missing person report that matched. The only odd detail mentioned in the police report was that he had firework shrapnel embedded in his back, as if he'd fallen through an explosion. Of course, no one connected it to the display, no one except me. I sent the photo to the local police anonymously, and I never heard back. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was caught in an accident. Maybe he'd been somewhere nearby when something went wrong. But the distance didn't make sense. He would have had to fall straight down to land where they found him. No burns on his clothes, no signs of being launched or blown by anything on the ground. And yet, there was that photo. The worst part. A week later, I went back to the camera. That photo was gone. It wasn't just missing. The file number, it was skipped, like it was never taken at all. But I know it was. I checked my email. Not there. The email was, but not the photo. Truly just the weirdest thing I've ever experienced, and I don't even have the proof anymore. This happened in 2016. I was 17, and that year our town had its first real 4th of July celebration since the early 2000s. I guess there'd been a bunch of budget issues, some drama with the mayor's office, so for years it had just been cookouts and sparklers in people's backyards. But that summer, they brought back the parade and even hired a big fireworks company to do a professional show at Miller Park. It was kind of a big deal. I remember everyone gathered in lawn chairs and on blankets in the grass. My friends and I had snuck in some cheap drinks and were laying under the sky, waiting for the finale. When it hit, the crowd went nuts. Huge bursts of red and gold exploding right above us. And then there was this one firework. It shot higher than the rest. We all noticed it. It was sort of out of sync with the rest, too. It didn't explode immediately, just kept going. So high it looked like a star. And then it burst, but it was strange. Just this dull white glow that didn't fade, and there didn't appear to be any sound. It just lingered, almost like it got stuck in the sky. People clapped, confused but impressed. I remember my friend Kyle going, "Dude, that one's broken," and we all laughed. But the next night, it was still there. We thought maybe it was Venus or something, like a star, but then it blinked slowly, like a slow pulse. White light, fade out, then back again. Same spot in the sky. People on the community Facebook started posting about it. Some said that it was a drone or a satellite. A couple of older folks said it was them, and they got laughed at on the page. My mom thought that it was a trick of the atmosphere. I didn't know what to think. But then the power started going out. Not everywhere, just at the houses that backed up to the woods by the park. One night on a dare, Kyle and I rode our bikes over there. I didn't really want to, but he kept saying that we were being called to do it. He was joking, of course, at first. When we got to the clearing behind Miller Park, the air was obviously different. It was heavier, not hot, just thick, like being underwater. The light above us pulsed again. No wind, no bugs, no sounds, just that light. We stood there for a minute, and Kyle said, dead serious, "Don't look at it." Then he dropped his bike, took off into the woods. I didn't follow. I couldn't. I felt like I was frozen in place. Eventually, I turned and rode home, shaking the whole way. I couldn't believe how much time had passed. How had everything taken hours? No way. And Kyle, he didn't come back that night, or the next. The cops found him the following afternoon, barefoot and dazed, a few miles away, walking down the center of Highway 40. He didn't remember anything. He wouldn't even talk about it. The light in the sky, it was gone. I didn't go to the fireworks shows at Miller Park after that. No one really talks about that year anymore. But sometimes when there's like a thunderstorm or the power flickers at night, I swear I see it again, just for a second, faintly glowing in the clouds in the exact same spot. Whatever it was, I don't think it was ever really a firework at all. The 4th of July means different things to different people. In the Blue Ridge Mountains of West Virginia, we don't light off fireworks to celebrate. It's partly to avoid forest fires, but the things roaming in the woods out here, they're not anything you want paying any mind when you go out there. And fireworks, that'll get them coming out right away. Let's just say in the case of a mountain scorcher, it's not the deer and grizzlies we worry about when it comes to being displaced. It's what preys upon the mighty grizzly that we try to avoid. I myself have personally seen Bigfoot, dogmen, skinwalkers, shapeshifters, black-eyed children, you name it. We have all of them out here, and I've seen them on more than a few occasions. Most of the time, they tend to mind their own business, stick to hunting the big game out here. Again, grizzlies, bucks, big old boars. Their bones begin to litter the ground the further you go in. These creatures make themselves known when they're on the prowl. All the birds get quiet as the shrieks start echoing in the mountains. It's rare to engage with these creatures more than a quick glance, but it's not unheard of for people to go missing off the trails, either never to be heard of or gone without a trace, or their remains are found a short time later, usually in a spot that's already been combed by a search party. Tracking dogs are never any help. Haven't found anyone that I know of. 9 times out of 10, they lose the scent right away. The other times, they'll catch a smell that puts their hackles up, and they'll refuse to continue the search. They turn into logs on a leash. No amount of pulling can get them to budge. I've seen it happen too many times, and I've joined my fair share of search parties, ones that have come home unsuccessful. No matter how many times I see it, though, it never gets easier, watching the families lose hope as the groups trickle in empty-handed. I'd be a fool to say that I had any true knowledge of their eating habits or preferences to meat. I'd bet, however, that circumstances and opportunity are the greatest contributing factors when they're choosing their next meal. And that's why you learn from an early age to keep your wits about you and your head on a swivel. We're built a little different in West Virginia. And I'm sure all up and down the Appalachian they teach their young the same rules when it comes to the outdoors. More often than not, it's the tourists you'll see go missing in the mountains. Someone unfamiliar with an environment so unrepeatable within the laws of nature. This is primarily why I'm here, as my story is about an incident that we had down here the last 4th of July. A boy got real lucky when he snuck out of his home with a handful of sparklers and a box of matches. He had the potential to get his whole family killed that night. I work with his father, Angus. He's the manager at our lumber yard. Moved out here a couple of years ago from Pennsylvania to replace the last manager. He wasn't worth the paper that his checks were printed on. But Angus, he was all right. We all liked Angus. Sure, he was a little wet behind the ears and the culture shock took a tad bit of getting used to. But he leaned into it, proved himself a valuable leader on the team. A bale of feed would have done a better managing job than the last guy, quite frankly, but Angus was much more than a bale of feed, and that's why we welcomed him with open arms, though it was only after he told us about his kid having a close encounter that any of us thought to warn him about the woods. Well, I wouldn't say none of us thought to warn him. I think it crossed all of our minds at one point or another, but we held our tongues. Most likely either not wanting to scare him off or come off as unstable to the new manager. Either way, in 2023, the 4th was midweek. The company had the day off, but we were working at the crack of dawn the next day. That morning, when I showed up, a few of the guys were already there. Both of them parked outside the gates to the lumberyard. Angus hadn't shown up that morning to unlock everything, and one of our men had to drive back into town where the office headquarters were to grab the spare keys. After that hiccup, we started work like any other normal day. It was after lunch, practically the end of the day, when Angus came into work. When he got out of his truck, he had a cast from his shoulder to his wrist, and stretching from his shoulder up to his neck were dark purple bruises. I hopped out of the side loader, caught up with him asking what the hell happened. Angus said that his shoulder got ripped out of its socket last night and broke his arm. Fella next to me starts asking Angus about drinking that moonshine he bottled for him. Tate's Moonshine's known for blacking you out if you're not an experienced drinker. He gifted Angus a batch earlier that month for his birthday, but it hadn't been touched yet. Angus sat down under a tarp in a folding chair. He was in pretty bad shape, and all of us were telling him to just go home. It was crazy that he'd showed up to begin with. He lifts his head up to look at us, panning eye contact between the guys, asking if anyone's ever seen anything strange while working in the woods. All of us nodded our heads, but the question was so broad, it opened up a chance for jokes about stumbling into cold orgies, which had happened to one of our guys near Halloween time in the early 2010s. They invited him to join, but instead of taking them up on the offer, he got on his walkie-talkie and told someone to grab the rifles. We didn't have rifles out here, but the cult of debauchery didn't know that. They all scattered running naked in different directions. All of us laughed except Angus. He wasn't in the mood for jokes. He couldn't hang out long in between pain pills. He said, "No, stop. I'm being serious. The night before, his son Jason had snuck out with sparklers and a box of matches. Angus wasn't necessarily worried about Jason being safe with a box of matches. I'm sure it was more so because he knew living that far out into the brush, there was wildlife that they needed to watch out for, and that's why he didn't want Jason outside with the sparklers. He didn't stray too far from the driveway, though, only about 20 or so yards off the gravel. So Angus didn't immediately stomp out or scold Jason for going outside alone. For a few minutes, Angus stood in their dining room window, watching Jason light a sparkler and then stomp on the match before he'd start spinning and dancing around with the white, crackling stick. It only stayed lit for 15 seconds max, but it was fun. Then another match would have to be lit for the process to repeat. Angus watched a few rounds of this go by, but as Jason lit his third sparkler, its brightest right after its ignition, before it simmered into the usual sparkler glow. In that second or two of maximum brightness, Angus saw a long, pale arm reach out from behind a tree and then pull back out of view. He almost didn't believe his eyes when he saw it. The tree that it came from was way too small to be able to conceal anything behind. Jason makes a big windmill motion with the sparkler, and Angus is horrified to see multiple figures stepping in between the trees around Jason as he played with the sparklers. With his gun holstered on his belt, Angus stormed out the screen door toward his son, still not sure what he saw. He walked to Jason, trying not to scare him by looking panicked. He asks him how many more sparklers he has left while he scans the tree line for the figures. Jason says he's on his last one. Angus allows him to light it up. And as it hits peak brightness, he sees multiple figures move out from behind the trees around them. They were tall. The tops of their heads stretched past the sparkler's shrinking light. They looked thin and chalk white. There was a glint reflected in their eyes. Pairs of two small black dots seemingly surrounded them. He said that they had no mouth or nose, just beady black round eyes. Angus says he moved fast, faster than he moved in years. He ran for Jason and reached for his gun, but before he could even draw it, something grabbed him from behind. Said it felt like steel had clamped down on his upper arm, right below the shoulder. Cold and inhuman. He barely had time to register it before he caught sight of another one, further out, gliding, not running, straight for Jason. That's when instinct took over. Instead of twisting to shoot the thing holding him, Angus raised his arm and fired at the one coming for his boy. He got off one shot, then another. The first one missed. The second one clipped it. And whatever it was, it let out a sound he couldn't describe. Not a scream, not an animal yelp. Something in between, but deeper and scarier. But the one behind him didn't flinch. In fact, it started pulling him. Angus said it dragged him backwards, fast and hard, toward a tree with a split trunk, one of those old oaks with a V-shaped gap near its bottom. The gap was maybe a foot wide at most. There was no way his body could fit through it. But that didn't stop whatever was dragging him. It kept yanking with impossible strength, trying to pull him through a space meant for a raccoon, not a grown man. He said that he could feel his shoulder go first, just pop right out of place like a pulled chicken wing. And then the grinding started. The pressure kept increasing, and he could feel bone cracking, skin tearing, the kind of pain that makes you feel like you're outside of yourself. With his good hand, he managed to get the barrel of his gun pointed back over his shoulder, and he fired blindly. And just like that, it let go. He hit the ground so hard he couldn't breathe. Jason was screaming. Angus said he doesn't remember much after that, just the sound of Jason dragging him, crying back toward the house. He blacked out somewhere along the way and came to in the hospital. Arm destroyed, shoulder socket shattered, nerves frayed, some of the muscle torn away completely. Doctors told him he was lucky. Said whatever animal did that must have just barely missed a major artery. He didn't bother correcting them. Let them think it was a bear, a cougar, whatever helped them sleep at night. He told us that story once. Said he wouldn't tell it again. Didn't want Jason hearing it, thinking it was something to joke about, or worse, go looking for answers. We didn't really press him. Out here, when someone gives you a warning like that, you take it. You don't light fireworks in the woods. You don't go outside after dark unless you absolutely have to. And if you see something move between the trees, no, you didn't. Just go inside, lock the doors, and be thankful it didn't see you back. The worst summer job I ever had wasn't really the worst job ever, but one isolated incident kept these feelings resonating through the years. When I saw this question, I knew I had to answer. I was a summer camp youth club leader at the YMCA for 1 year. I'd already been working for the Y, but that was the first year they'd asked me to be a camp counselor for 2 weeks in July. Usually it would be my lead that attended these trips, but she was just about to give birth or had just given birth. Either or, I was next in line. It was extra money, and a month before I got that offer, my boyfriend at the time cheated on me with my friend at the time, KARI Mckiernan. That snake bitch ruined my summer schedule indefinitely. Yet another big incentive to get away for a few weeks. Sure, I'd be watching over some kids, but what's the worst that could happen? The morning arrives and me and the other camp leads are supposed to show up early for an orientation. Then the kids would arrive shortly after. Each lead receives 5 kids for their troop. I wish that I could say I remember all the kids' names that I had in my troop. I know there was a Tabitha because we called her Tabby Cat, but out of the girls I had, the only name I distinctly remember, and will always remember for the rest of my life, was Beth. But why Beth? Here's why Beth. And this shit literally started on the first day. Well, night, because that's when she started scaring the girls. I don't know if it was even a full moon that night, but Beth kept telling everyone that something changes in her during a full moon. Once her parents had found her on the front lawn with bloodied clothing after a full moon. Dumb shit like that. A few of these girls were churchgoers, so Beth's demonic claims were really getting to them. Oh yeah, Beth told them that she could talk to the devil before the full moon thing. The cabin, all 6 of us shared, was built like a miniature log cabin. Inside each wall, aside from the entrance, had 2 slabs of woods on it, resembling bunk beds. The first thing everyone did was pick their bunks and set their sleeping bags on them. I, of course, had to be above Beth, as the other 4 girls had linked up immediately as bunkmates. The camp cabins are relatively spread apart from each other. Each cabin has a small trail that joins into a larger central pathway. Depending on which way you took, it would lead you to either the food hall or the art center. Or swimming, archery, and the rec, that was going left and right, but on the other side of the pathway. Like, if you were to keep walking straight out of the cabin, you'd find yourself at a huge lake with docks and kayaks. The cabin my troop stayed in had a beautiful view of the lake, and my bunk had a perfectly unobstructed view of it through one of the small windows. But that means so did Beth. Still, the same first night, I'm falling asleep and I can hear the girls all chatting below me. Their conversations make me squirm in my sleeping bag, thinking about being so cringy at that age, and if I wasn't already slightly disturbed by their bursts of laughter and whispers, Beth had to make shit weird again. From below me, I can hear her get way louder than the other girls' whisper squeaks. She goes, "There's someone floating above the lake. No, look, there's really someone out there." I'm turned facing the wall, and I can hear the girls slowly grow quiet. None of them move, though. They're all apprehensive to leave the warmth of their bunks on the possibility of being fooled by one of Beth's crazy claims. For me, though, all I had to do was turn over. So I did. I'm looking about 120 yards from our window to the water, and suddenly I felt that impending sense of doom, that deep fight or flight fear. Beth wasn't lying. I saw a man suspended just above the water of the lake. If he was in the water, I would have thought that he'd drown, but he was floating above the water. His shadow, it was visible on the calm waves under him. One of the girls eventually gets up to look. She sees it too, and calls for the other girls to come to the window. They all press against it, looking at this anomaly. This blocks my view of the lake, but almost right after they all gather at the window, they all begin to scream and run back to their beds. Pretending I'm asleep, I can hear them all talking back and forth about how a blue light came up from the lake and pulled the man down into the lake. They argued if they saw a tentacle reach through the blue beam of the light to grab the man. One of the girls was quietly sobbing, and I fell asleep to Beth's voice repeating, "See, I told you so." The next day, I'm shocked that none of the girls are bringing it up to me. Like, none of the girls tried to tell me what happened the previous night. I couldn't tell them I was fake sleeping to ignore their cries of terror, so I just left it alone too. But me and 5 tiny witnesses did see something. So, what was it? Years ago, I used to be a lifeguard. Small neighborhood pool, nothing fancy, just 6 lap lanes, a diving board, and a chlorine tank that always leaked. I worked there every summer in my teens, then stayed on part-time in my 20s while figuring out what to do with my life. Now I work with the city through Parks and Rec. We happen to be responsible for the property the pool sits on. It's an old pool anyway. We shut the place down in 2011. Technically, it was a chemical issue. Filters went bad, the water turned cloudy, and one of the staff had a bad reaction. But unofficially, there was an incident that no one talked about. Something that happened late one night after closing. I didn't witness it myself, but I was on shift earlier that day. I remember that despite it being July, it was unusually cold. Chalked up to a building falling apart. But then, after dark, a teenage girl had drowned. Only she didn't look drowned when they pulled her out. No bloating, no fluid in her lungs, just pale, still. And her hands, they were raw. Skin shredded like she'd tried to claw at the tile. And the worst part, there were fingernail marks under the pool's cover, but it hadn't come loose. They drained the whole thing after that, and they never reopened. Flash forward to last week. I get a call from one of the new guys at Parks and Rec. Says the motion lights keep going off at the old pool. He went to check it out. Reported the place was still locked up and he couldn't see how anyone could have gotten in. Yet he said he heard strange noises coming from inside. Splashing, footsteps in the locker room, doors slamming. But no one was there. Normally I'd write that stuff off or tell him to phone the police. I mean, the pool doesn't even have water, so I'm not sure about the splashing. But I don't know. Something in his voice struck me. He sounded shaken, like he wanted me to tell him it was nothing. When I mentioned making a police report, he almost sounded embarrassed at the idea, so I said I'd swing by. It was just after 10 p.m. when I pulled up. The gate padlock was intact. I drove around with my spotlight, checking the windows, doors. No sign of forced entry, all as the rookie had explained. But as soon as I stepped out of the truck, I heard it. The distinct echo of water moving. Not wind. I mean full-on swimming sounds. Arms slicing water. A quiet splash every few seconds. I still had my key to the pool house. I unlocked the main door, stepped inside. Everything was dark. I noticed the locker room lights flicker behind me, motion activated. Except I hadn't walked far enough to trigger them. I didn't think so. The inside hadn't changed much, smelled like mildew and old sunscreen. Most of the lockers were still labeled with duct tape from over a decade ago. I walked through the showers, across the maintenance area, and onto the pool deck. The last time I'd even peered in, the water was still drained. Cracked white tiles stretched out in every direction. The deep end was a stained, echoey hole, and in the silence I could hear the echo of my own breath bouncing back at me. But upon closer inspection, there was still some water. Just a thin channel. A ripple that ran the length of the pool. It shimmered differently than the dry tile around it on the outside. But it was more than a shimmer. It seemed like movement. As I walked the perimeter, I noticed something unusual, for sure. Wet footprints. Not mine. I was still standing on the dry deck. These prints went from the edge of the pool to the lifeguard chair and stopped. I climbed the chair to get an overall better view of the pool. From up there, you could see it clearer. The water was anything but still. No shape that I could make out in the water itself. No head breaking the surface or anything like that. Just the faint gliding motion of someone doing a lazy breaststroke underwater. I watched it move, whatever it was, through the water. Something invisible creating ripples. Watching, it slid forward. When it reached the deep end, it paused. The water was still again, but only for a second. Then uncontrollable splashing. There wasn't a soul in sight, and yet the water was erupting in a way that it only can when something is thrashing in it. I stepped down from the chair, not taking my eyes off the water until I grabbed my phone to call the city guy. Somehow the screen was shattered. I didn't drop it. I swear. I didn't sit on it weird, no excuse. But there it was. It had been crushed. I threw it back in my pocket. In the hallway mirror, I caught my reflection, and I stopped cold. The back of my shirt was soaked, like I'd been dunked, but I hadn't gotten close to the water. I ran a hand back there, and it was freezing cold. I didn't feel any wetness. Nothing made sense. It was scaring the hell out of me. I left, didn't look back. Locked the gate. I grabbed my phone about halfway through the drive home. It was perfectly fine. The next morning, I drove by just to see it in the daylight, get over this overwhelming sensation that I just couldn't let go of. The pool was empty. No water and no one swimming, invisible or otherwise. The city as a whole remains convinced that it's kids breaking in, making noises, setting off the lights. But I know what I saw. Something's in there. Maybe just a night. Swimming laps. I once worked as a housing inspector. A new client had purchased a house, and I was tasked with going and inspecting it. From the information on hand, the house was very old, built in 1908, was quite derelict and in the middle of the woods. I was in no hurry to inspect the house, so I scheduled it for my last stop of the day. I did my jobs as per usual, and then I made my way to the house. I parked my car on the road, and as I walked up the long path, nothing jumped out at me. It was a run-down 3-story house. For me, it was just your run-of-the-mill wreck. I guess the buyers had walked through and seen some potential in the home, but I could see none. It was getting to be dusk, and as I didn't have the key to the front door, I made my way to the rear of the property to access the back door. As I came around the back of the house, I noticed that the back door itself opened up into a large kitchen. The sun began to set behind me, and I could feel a drastic change in air temperature. It was late summer, and I assumed that this was the reason for the drop in temperature. I turned to look at the sunset, noting that the cloud cover gave the sky a nice crimson hue. I turned back towards the door, and that's when I saw it. On the other side of the kitchen was a door that led into a hallway, which in turn led to the front door. The front door had colored glass, but what was standing in the darkness of the hallway, to this day, still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There was a silhouette of a man. Judging from the build, I could tell it was a man. There were no distinguishable features to see, just a black silhouette. What happened next froze me to the spot. Where his face was, 2 eyes opened, and they were the color red, unblinking and unmoving. Those eyes glowed red, and I could tell that they were looking right at me. At first, I couldn't look away. Those red orbs seemed to stare straight into my soul, and I found myself transfixed, staring back. Every fiber in me told me that I should run, but I could not move. I stared unblinking at the red eyes, and they in turn stared unblinking back at me. My eyes began to water, and I blinked to clear them, but as I opened my eyes again, the silhouette was gone. I freaked. I quickly ran around the house, jumped in my car, and sped home. What would normally take me 25 minutes to drive home only took me 10, as I couldn't get away fast enough. In my report, I wrote that the house and some structural issues couldn't be remedied, and the house was eventually torn down. In its place is a new housing unit with 6 3-bedroom homes. I've heard stories from tradesmen who have been on site at night, and they've all said that they felt a cold chill every time they went there. I did look up the history of the property, but nothing unusual jumped out at me. Up to that point in my life, I never believed in the supernatural or paranormal. Even now, I'm skeptical of most things, but I know what I saw was pure evil, and I've never had an encounter like it since. We didn't have a real Boy Scout or Brownie Scout troop when I was a kid, but we did have a few parents who took kids camping during summer breaks. We didn't earn badges or anything like that. We mostly went hiking and roasted marshmallows with the occasional ghost story. We were a small group, usually a couple of adults and 5 or 6 kids, but there were only 4 of us the last time I went. My friend's dad and uncle had taken us to a spot that we'd been to a dozen or more times. There was nothing new or different about it from any other trips. We had 4 tents, 1 for each of the adults and 2 for the kids. That first night, we went to bed around 10, but only the adults actually went to sleep. After an hour, we were bored, and we decided to go exploring. We went back up the same small trail that we'd hiked that morning, one that we had all been on countless times. There was a gnarly, twisted tree that was always used as a turnaround point, but we didn't see it that time. We walked for what felt like too long, and finally realized we didn't see anything that looked familiar. Our flashlights weren't anything fancy, so we had just been pointing them at the ground and talking the whole time. No one had really paid attention to where we were going. Assuming that we passed the tree, we turned back. Again, too much time had passed. We still never saw the tree or anything familiar. It was starting to look like we turned onto a different trail or something, but we didn't recognize anything. We knew the whole area well. One of us should have recognized something. That's about the time that we started hearing movement in the woods. It sounded like a big animal, but the biggest thing that we have is black bears, and none of us had ever seen one around the campsite. We tried to find the source with our flashlight, but the trees were too thick to see anything. Whatever it was coming closer, so we walked away, and then it started running, so we started running. Its footsteps were way heavier than a person's, and we could hear tree limbs breaking as it rushed through the woods. I've never run so fast in my life. I assumed the others were behind me, but I was too afraid to actually look back. I'm not sure how far or how long we ran, but eventually I fell down. 2 of my friends were behind me and stopped to pull me up. That's when we realized it was quiet again. Nothing was chasing us, and we recognized the path we were on, finally. I'm not sure how we got to it. It was a different one from where we started, and they weren't supposed to connect, but we never actually left the trail. We yelled for our missing friend, but he never appeared. It was almost daylight, even though we hadn't been gone nearly long enough for the sun to be up. So we went back to camp. We hoped our friend would already be there, but we only found 2 angry, hungover chaperones looking everywhere for us. It felt like we were gone for maybe an hour or 2, but it had been over 6 hours. We were made to stay at camp while the adults went to look for our missing friend. They were gone for over an hour and came back empty-handed. We called the police after that and spent the rest of the day being interviewed while search and rescue took over. They never found a trace of our friend or anything that could have been chasing us. Everyone treated us like we made the whole thing up, but they never found any discrepancies in our stories. There were no more camping trips after that. Nobody would have wanted to go even if someone had tried to organize one. A lot of people blamed the chaperones, even though they genuinely did nothing wrong. I just have no frickin' clue what happened that night, no matter how many times I tell this story. Mothman. That's the only name I've ever been able to give it. It was a warm summer evening and my family had gathered for an outdoor movie night at one of our relatives' houses. They'd set up a big screen in the backyard, rows of folding chairs and blankets covering the grass. The scent of popcorn and citronella candles was mixed in the air. In the sun, it was setting. For a kid around 7 or 8 years old, it really felt like the perfect night. The movie had just started when my attention began to wander. I wasn't interested in whatever was playing on the screen. I still don't remember what it was. So I turned my gaze toward the tree line at the edge of the yard. It was almost fully dark by then, the faint glow of the moon casting shadows across the ground. And that's when I saw something. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, just my imagination playing with the shapes of the trees, but as I stared, I realized it was something else entirely. A tall, black figure stood just beyond the trees, partially hidden by the shadows. It looked like it was covered in fur or hair, its long, spindly arms hanging unnaturally low. Its eyes, though, I remember those most clearly. They glowed a deep, almost fiery red, cutting through the darkness like embers. And it was staring right at me. I froze, not in fear exactly, but in shock. It wasn't moving. not even a little. Just standing there, watching. The distance between us made it hard to make out specific details, and the dim light didn't help. I couldn't see if it had wings or not, though part of me expected it to. It was hard to explain the feeling, but it didn't seem threatening. There was an almost unnatural calm about it, like it wasn't interested in hurting me. It just was. After what felt like forever, curiosity got the better of me. I turned and ran back to the group, tugging on the sleeve of the nearest adult. "There's something in the woods," I said, urging them to come and see. Of course, they were skeptical, but I wouldn't let it go. I begged someone to follow me back to where I'd seen it. By the time I returned to the spot, it was completely dark. The figure was gone. The only thing staring back at me now were the trees. I scanned the area desperately, trying to catch another glimpse, but it was as if it had vanished into thin air. Understandably, no one believed me. I was just a kid with an overactive imagination, they said. Maybe I'd seen a shadow or a deer moving through the woods. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a deer. And though I wasn't afraid when I saw it, the memory of those glowing red eyes has stuck with me ever since. What was it? Was it watching me for a reason? Why didn't it move while I was looking? And why did it disappear the moment I turned away? I've never been able to answer those questions, but one thing I do know for sure, it wasn't my imagination. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me, whether it's your first time or you're a regular. Your support means the world over here. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night, and keep those eyes open for those deep sleep videos. Of course, subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. A special thanks to the Darkest Hour channel members, Lori TESDAHL, Sarah Marie, Robert Bailey, COLTDADDY Eagle, Mallory Dominguez, KARI WATKINS, PILAR TREDEN WIXSON, Larry Hill, RIPLEY, JOJO STARCHER, Mary Patrick, Debbie LAFRENIERE, Julie Bourdelais, Jennifer BECK, MARINA LACHNER, Make Hamilton Home, Evan Pratt, Mary Hineline, Catherine /ImtherealKatie Isabelle, Landshark, Danielle Hecht, Veronica Mckiernan, Keziah Pietersen, Amber Baker, Khris Lauzon, Kara Chios, Marvin Allen, Forgotten Ruins TV, Raven Wolf, Carlos, Stacia Gillette, and Nate B. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons: Tracy S., Mary H., Tanya F., Tamara K., Monica L., Zoe Watt, Shelley B., Donald C., Marion T., Rat Girl, Alicia S., Aaron G., Nikki H., Mr. Revenant, Naz K., Brendan G., Paul T., Nicholas C., Tony P., Lizanne, Arlene F., Adrian, T.F. Parham, Jason G., Lori T., and Bobo Jenkins. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining our Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, Amanda, darkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.